Can you go to the next slide, Jason? Thanks. So what is a pitch? Let's start with the basics. A pitch is a journalistic prompt. It is the very first step in the editorial process. Most readers get to see the final story, either printed in the newspaper or on our website. But the very beginning of that long process starts out as a pitch. And it is often posed as a question that needs answering, but not necessarily. Though at the heart of the pitch, there is always an inquiry. There is a curiosity to find something out or learn more about a certain thing. In traditional newsrooms, writers will pitch a story idea to their editor, in which the writer makes a case for why the story needs to be written, and then the editor approves or denies that pitch. So I'm actually not sure if the word pitch is actually like a baseball reference, but if it is, I think it makes sense, right? Because you're kind of throwing ideas at your editor, and you're kind of bouncing ideas with your editor to see whether this idea, has potential for a story. So when as a writer you are, or anyone really, when you're making a case for why a story should be written, you're also kind of arguing why it should be you who covers this story. Typically, when you take a pitch to any news outlet or any newsroom, aside from making an argument, why the story should be pursued, you also want to make an argument about why you should be the one who writes it. And in a minute, we're going to talk about how we're a little bit different at Southside Weekly. So typically, the editor makes a judgment call, and which, that's a lot of power to have. So they, depending on their priorities as an individual or as an organization, they will decide if that story fits, their editorial style, their editorial tone. Is it of interest to their audience? And then also there is kind of like the question, who is their audience? Where do they live? And it's not uncommon for legacy newspapers to pander to their subscribers, who don't always look like the readers, right? So pitching is a skill that is not really taught in the newsroom. It is either learned with practice, just simply by having these conversations with your editor, once you're hired in a newsroom, or you're a freelance writer, or you're kind of introduced to it in journalism school, if you have the privilege of having gone to journalism school. Historically, pitching, the pitching process has perpetuated inequity because the editor can act as a gatekeeper, and they often do, because they keep out stories from, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or they may simply not hire any, people of color, or they may not work directly with people of color in any way. In my personal experience, this is where I often faced a lot of pushback whenever I was in newsrooms that were white dominant. Having to go to a person that, doesn't understand my lived experience, and then trying to make a case for why this story about my particular community was important and why it deserved attention. It was a lot of pressure, and it was very often a deflating experience. So for underprivileged writers who don't go to journalism school, or don't have like these great relationships with their editors, many times they aren't taught how to pitch. And given that the pitch is the first step in a story, it can really keep out, a lot of people, traditionally underrepresented people. Jason, can you go to the next slide? So what makes a good pitch? Again, this depends on each newsroom. It depends on the editor. Um, but we like to think that all of our stories are relevant to the South Side. Um, all of our stories need to take place in the South Side. They need to involve a South Sider, be of interest to a native South Sider, or have a clear connection to the South Side. It sounds, like I'm repeating myself, but we are a place-based, newspaper, so that's super important. The story idea should be timely. As a person who's pitching the story, you kind of had to answer in the pitch why it's important to cover this story at this moment, as opposed to, you know, next year or any other point in time. Um, and if there's like a newsworthy element to it, it's also very important to bring it up in your pitch. A good pitch hasn't been done before. And if it has been done before, then you are exploring an entirely new angle. You're either providing an update to a topic or entity, or maybe you're asking, well, how does this issue or topic affect this particular group of people or this segment of the population? How does this community view this thing? Maybe in the original piece that you read in another news outlet, there was a glaring omission, or maybe you were left with questions. So, you would take a different approach from what you read, somewhere else. Um, a good pitch will include, and a good story will include context and analysis, which is something that is difficult to do with breaking news. When we do breaking news, when anybody does breaking news, I think they just want to focus on the facts, but there really isn't a lot of like historical or socio-political context included, and there's almost always no analysis. I think this is something that makes our stories different than stories in other places, is that we really try to include that, historical context, another type of context and background in our stories, and if possible, provide some analysis as well. And a good pitch and a good story has a scope. So a scope of place, time, and people. So for example, a scope and time means that you're looking at a specific you have a specific timeline for your story. um, a scope in place means that you're either covering, like you're deciding whether you're covering a neighborhood, whether you're covering something at the city level, at the county level, at the state level. Are you looking at a national issue, right? And you also kind of get to decide what is the range of people that you're gonna be interviewing um, or mentioning in your story. Can you go to the next slide, Jason?
I actually had a comment about the first part of this, so I wanted to run by you. So I feel like we're always kind of, rethinking what it means to be for a story to be relevant to the South Side. I think, for like COVID was a good example where it was such a big story that it sort of transcended local. I mean, we obviously covered it from a local angle, but we also covered it more broadly and more generally than we would a typical story. Um, and so for me, it's always kind of fuzzy what is something that we should cover and what's not. And I had this idea this week that I wanted to run by you and everybody else to get their thoughts. But basically, just I was thinking it might be worth writing a note about the efforts to like ban critical race theory in Tennessee and I think maybe some other states. That seems like it's not super local at all, but seems like it's part of this larger trend happening where people are trying to erase the history or disenfranchise Black voters. Like there's this sort of really terrible wave of Republicans trying to rewrite history, and is it is it Southside Weekly's place to play any role in informing our readers about that happening? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are, a lot of topics that are of national importance. And I do think we should be covering them. But we just need to find a way to localize them. So, when you're deciding on who the sources are going to be for this story, you might want to interview local college students. You might want to interview scholars from the University of Chicago or the city colleges or any schools who are teaching this course. Um, yeah, you would probably look at how many universities in the states or in the city are teaching this course, maybe how popular it is, and how local residents feel about it. Something like that. But you would definitely want to give like the national background, the national context. But at the end of the day, ultimately, you want to focus it on something local, on local perspectives. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does anyone have a similar question like that?
Um, it's not fully formed in my head, but like yesterday, a friend was telling me about something that was happening in Lincoln Park, and I was like, eh. Um, and it was like about like historic preservation. There were issues around like building ownership, um, and stuff like that. Um, and the first thing that I said after she was telling me about it was like, okay, like if we're gonna write about it in the weekly, like we have to it like I said, like we have to tie it to the South Side. Um and what I was thinking was like that issue, that particular issue that she was talking about is probably something that is equally, if not more prevalent in different areas on the South Side. It's just a matter of, maybe talking about this issue and then like making the comparison with other sort of similar things that are happening in those South Side neighborhoods. But I don't even know if that was the right thing to tell her, because she, like, first and foremost was leading with the example in Lincoln Park. And I feel like if there's not, like, just leading with that, and if there's not like a close match, then like the whole thing would have to be reframed. But I don't know like what the answer is.
I think you had the right instinct. Connect that effort to similar efforts happening in the South Side. And sometimes once you explain that to a writer, they will understand, because they understand that the newspaper, is based in the South Side, and that our readership will consist of ideally mainly Southsiders. Um, so, we're not saying don't mention Lincoln Park or don't include that in the story, but it should not be the focus. I also think that like historic preservation um, processes, they affect the whole city, and you're definitely gonna find examples in the South Side, or at least I can think of a couple of examples of that happening in the South Side. So you would kind of have to reframe the whole story, because you probably wouldn't begin the story talking about Lincoln Park, but you could include it as an example somewhere in the body. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
And there's been a couple of instances recently where we've mentioned the North Side. For example, when we were covering COVID-19 in Asian communities, we understood that the Chinese and Chinese American community, was heavily concentrated, in Chinatown in the South Side. But we also knew that the larger Asian community was all across the city and even outside of the city. So even though we focused on Chinatown, we still included examples from these other communities that were outside of the South Side. And similarly with the Palestinian community, they have a really strong presence in the suburbs right outside the Southwest Side. And we had to go there because, we wanted to hear from people in this community. So, we had to leave our comfort zone a little bit. And I think that's fine. But it was still relevant to our publication because these protests, spilled into downtown and other parts of the South Side. So that's how we localized it. Yeah, those are just two examples. Okay, so the weekly's pitch process is non-traditional. Some call it unusual, and that's because literally anyone can submit a pitch. You know, our pitches are publicly available and publicly accessible. Anybody can go and use one of our pitch forms and submit a pitch. Anyone can go and claim one of our pitches. So the burden of coming up with story ideas, if we want to call it a burden, right? I think it's a privilege, but it's also a beautiful thing. But coming up with story ideas does not just fall on the writers, to come up with. So all Southside Weekly editors and staff writers are encouraged to submit pitches, and the public as well.
So one thing I would add is that it's technically public, but you do have to sign up to be a contributor, right? Because you
Good
couldn't,
point. Yeah.
you in theory wouldn't be able to access the pitch doc unless someone gave you the password, and usually you don't get the password unless you were onboarded as a contributor.
That's true, though. I know that our password has gotten around, and some people do get to see our pitch doc somehow.
Yeah, I don't know if we should be more cautious about that or not. I feel like, yeah, but it's generally pretty public, and we're going to go into more detail about what it looks like from the contributor side later in this presentation.
Cool. Can you go to the next slide? So how to write a weekly pitch. Yeah, so these are just step-by-step instructions. You give the pitch a title. You write a paragraph at a minimum. Many people, they will go on and on. They'll write 5 paragraphs. I think it's fine because it provides, again, that background that writers many times need. And you might save a writer from having to do all this, this Google research, if you provide all of the context that's needed. So, write at the very least 1 paragraph describing the topic or the story to be covered. You want to suggest a potential angle that the writer could take. Just keep in mind that they might wish to take the story in a different direction. Include suggestions for the format of the story. Is it going to be a feature, a review, a Q&A, a more traditionally reported story? You kind of get to suggest what it might look like. It's helpful to include links to articles or information about the subject, and especially past Southside Weekly coverage. That's a good way to avoid us repeating the work. If we've already done, a lot of coverage on a specific topic, it's good to know what's been said in the past, and it'll help you decide, how to follow that up. In the pitch, you want to try to list some potential sources, and it's okay if you don't know exactly how the story should be approached, but you should give some suggestions or thoughts for the writer to start with. If possible, provide a suggested word count and due date, and add your name to the pitch in case people need to get in contact with you for more information. And it's also not uncommon for the writer of the pitch to become the primary editor of the story, unless they themselves are writing the story. Does that make sense to people? Cool. So these pitches that people write, they get generated into what we call the pitch doc. And this is a list of pitches, AKA story ideas, written collectively by Southside Weekly. It's hosted on Airtable, and you can see it on our website. And it is seen by our network of writers who are in the hundreds. And it's also publicly available somewhat. Anyone can claim these pitches. Section editors must submit 2 or 3 new pitches per month. And once a month, new entries are sent in a pitch email from the editor-in-chief to our mailing list, which is also made up of hundreds of people. Next slide. So here are some pitch examples. And I was actually hoping that we could go, one by one and read them out loud, and then as a group decide how each one of these pitches could be improved upon, or is it a good pitch? So I was hoping that instead of breaking up into small groups, that we could just do this together as one big group. So the first one, this is a pitch that is currently in the pitch doc. It hasn't been claimed yet. The title is No Cop Academy Update. And it says, more than 2 years ago, Black youth led a campaign to stop the construction of a $95 million cop academy, reinforcing the local movement to defund the police. This month, the group is having a virtual event where they will release an informational toolkit and the trailer of a documentary. Find out what these youth are up to now and their next steps for the movement post George Floyd. So, yeah, I'll open it up to people. What are your initial thoughts about this pitch? What are its strengths, and is there anything that could be improved?
I think one thing that would be helpful to add would just be like the link to the event and any other links to like the documentary and the toolkit.
Yeah, this pitch didn't seem to include any links. So it would be good to include that.
Also, they don't give too much more information about the youth-led campaign. Like, they probably could give a little bit more detail about where they normally, like where the campaign originated, who is included in it, maybe some campaign members that that they could reach out to, like some sources to start out with to get more information. Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't really seem to suggest any sources other than, the youth. Is this a timely pitch?
I feel like it's not like necessarily rooted in like a particular happening. It's just like an update for the sake of update.
Yeah, because like it kind of, I think it would have been more timely like 2 years ago when they had that campaign to stop that construction. But now it's just this event with a toolkit. I think it could be maybe an interesting bulletin blurb, but the event, I'm not sure if it's going to be like too big.
Yeah, I think that for people who are interested in this and who maybe 2 years ago, were reading about it. I think I agree that it could be a bulletin, but it could also be like an 800-word write-up or like a short story about, what's next. I like the way I know there isn't a lot of information in the pitch, but I like find out what these youth are up to now and their next steps for the movement post George Floyd. So it's a good way to get people to think about it again. And it may not be timely, but it's a good way to bring it up just for people who might be interested in this topic. Yeah. Yeah,
those were all really good points. I think the the pitch attempted, right, to be timely when it mentions that, you know, there was a virtual event this month, and that there's a documentary coming up at some point. And also, like you mentioned, Alma, you know, taking into account, you know, the killing of George Floyd and all of the organizing that took place right after. How does that influence or change or improve or you know, anything? How are things different now for this group? Um, I agree, it could be improved, but I think there are some good elements. So let's move on to the next one. This is another update. What's next for the community, for the Chicago Community Bond Fund? And this was actually approved and we printed it. Was it in the last issue or 2 issues ago? 2 issues ago. So what will CCBF do next now that it's helped pass legislation that will eventually make its primary function obsolete? Does it intend to put pressure on the rollout of ending bail in Illinois? And if so, what kind? Will this change how it spends its funds while cash bail continues? What other legislative initiatives does it intend to work on? Does it have a vision yet for after 2023? CCBF's executive director for the past 2.5 years, Cheryl Grace, just left the organization last month, but weekly reporters have contact info for her and current bond fund members. Oh, they have info for her and current bond fund members. Interview them about what planning for this moment look like and the organization's plans going forward. Happy for someone else to take this pitch and links to resources. So any thoughts about this pitch?
Yeah, I think like all of the questions in the pitch uh lay some like good groundwork for exactly like what the writer needs to be asking themselves. If we're like comparing it to the last pitch, um it seems as though like if I was someone who wanted to take this picture, I was a writer, I would kind of know exactly what it is I'm looking for. Um and I mean, I know that like leaving room is also like a good thing, but I feel like since this is so specifically about like a specific happening, and like going forward or whatever, I feel like those questions shaping what the story would be about is very helpful.
Yeah, I also think it adds, you know, several layers to the story. Any other thoughts? Would this story be timely?
Yeah, in my opinion, because it's like always an issue. It's all like the issue of like bond money and things of that nature have always been an issue. And it's like a huge thing that like that's finally going to be changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think that the main question or the first question is very powerful, right? Here we have an organization that was founded on the basis of eliminating cash bond, right? And now they have this victory in front of them where, you know, their primary function, you know, has been accomplished, or is victorious. And so what happens now, right? I do think it's very timely. So let's move on to two more examples. Jason, are you there? Yes. So here we have an education pitch. I'll read it out loud. So the title is Public School in the Time of COVID. And this was a cover story. So the pitch says, CPS has decided to start the first quarter of the 2020-2021 school year with entirely remote learning because of concerns about COVID. However, concerns abound regarding how this change in schooling will affect children and parents. especially on the South Side, where a large proportion of households lack broadband internet access. This is an unprecedented school model which will affect 360,000 children, and it's unclear what kind of developmental and academic issues remote learning will create. For this article, I'd like to reach out to a pediatric infectious disease fellow at U of C, CPS, CTU, teachers and parents, and of CPS students to explore the thoughts and feelings surrounding this remote learning plan. I also plan to reach out to Ashvini and Emmeline for input, and I can't read the rest. Um, but yeah, obviously this pitch was approved because we did run it, and the writer decided to, in addition to pitching the story, they were going to write it themselves. However, that doesn't mean that because we approved it or that we ran the story that this pitch is perfect. So I'm curious to hear some feedback about what are the good elements and what could be improved on.
I think like just a really important one is that like the writer kind of has it all mapped out in a way already. Like not that like an editor is gonna hop on it and be like, okay, do exactly what you said you were gonna do, but like at least there's like a really good starting point for like just the roadmap of reporting.
Yeah, there's a solid foundation.
Yeah, I feel like that also there is a lot more that can come out of this pitch. That's why it's so interesting, especially the first sentence, because she wants to write, or she wrote about, or he about concerns with access to internet and things like that. But there are so many other concerns that parents have, and so this type of pitch could also inspire other stories. And I, like different, like three, maybe, like what other, there were so many concerns around that time. So yeah, I think it's really good, because other ideas can come up for like additional pitches just out of this one.
Good point. And shortly after this story was approved, somebody else pitched something similar about how going back to school during the pandemic, or how remote learning was disproportionately affecting students with special needs. So yes, I do think it sort of indirectly inspired other stories. And obviously, I think it's timely, right? Because when this was pitched, I think it was like late December, January. People were already thinking about, are we going to go back to school for the spring semester? So it was already in everyone's minds. People were talking about it. It was on the news almost every day. So this kind of took like a deep dive into the issue. So for the last example, this pitch was part of an issue that was entirely dedicated to envisioning a new future after the pandemic. So I'm going to read it out loud. With our dystopian present, it seems like more and more folks are seriously considering the possibility of new radical futures. But of course, some people have been envisioning new futures for years. This radio and or print piece interviews folks who have already been thinking about new futures and working towards them. Possible interviewees: H. Cap Clot, Benji Hart, Bria Royal, Molly Costello, Ladipo Chandra, Christmas Rouse. Sorry if I mispronounced any names. This piece is about process. How have these folks gone about envisioning radical new futures when the template of our current society pre-pandemic was still quite bleak? More so than the what, although what they're envisioning is still important. Also interested in hearing how the current pandemic has or hasn't changed the way they go about this work. Is there more energy in the air to actually make these changes now that that much more that much is imploding? Sorry. Before publishing Let's put a social media call out asking people to call in or message us with what radical futures they're envisioning and include these in the piece. Any thoughts?
I think it's a really interesting pitch. I would probably include links to some of the work that those interviewees are doing. Just so it's easier for anyone who wants to take the pitch to get to know about what the interviewees, the radical futures that they've been working towards with their work, just to get a better sense of what the piece would be talking about.
Definitely.
I don't know any of the interviewees. So the links would be super helpful, just to learn about who they are and figure out a way to localize this. Because I think that there's been a lot of people like thinking about a different future. The pandemic kind of inspired that in many ways. So maybe talking to organizers on the South Side too, or seeing like what types of movements the pandemic inspired. That would be cool. So, I mean, the people are probably from the South Side, but I don't want to assume that.
Mm-hmm. Good points. Any other thoughts?
I have another thought. In terms of like if it's timely, like I think it would be important to touch in the piece how the current pandemic has affected these thoughts of what the future looks like and radical futures, because that would make it more timely because it's hard to, I mean, the future hasn't happened yet. So it would be an interesting piece, but to make it timely, the writer should definitely consider kind of tying it into how the current pandemic has changed these views of these radical futures.
Yeah, I also feel like this pitch is very open-ended, which I think, as Chima mentioned earlier, when a pitch is kind of open-ended, it allows for maybe a little bit more creativity from the writer. Like they could kind of take it in any direction they want to take it. But I also think that it lacked examples. It mentions people to interview. And as people have already said, unless you know these people personally or you know about their work, you're not really sure, what the pitch is talking about. Like I think it would be helpful to give examples of the different ways that futures are being reconsidered or re-envisioned, especially before the pandemic. Like what were some ways that people were re-envisioning the future pre-pandemic, and what has changed now that we've been through the pandemic or we're going through the pandemic. So I think it lacks examples, and unless people know the subjects personally, I feel like a writer might feel insecure about taking on this pitch. And I think on the question of on the question of timeliness, I think there are also exceptions in the sense that, we have what we call evergreen stories. And these are stories that are of human interest, like people would find them interesting, but they don't necessarily have like a news peg, right? Like they could work like at any point in time, people would find them interesting, especially more prose and creative writing and poetry and things like that. Like they don't necessarily need that time, that element of timeliness. I also think that historical pieces, are always relevant, right? Because I think knowing about history or learning about history is important at any moment. So I think that when somebody wants to approach a piece of history or write a historical piece, I think the timeliness element is not as important. Jason, can you go to the next slide?
Well, I was going to mention one other thing about this pitch, and just that, and that was about how it came to be, because it sort of, I can't remember exactly. Didn't Irissa originally pitch this?
Yes.
So I think it came about in a conversation in a pitch meeting, and then I think it sat around for a while, and then we got this Illinois Humanities grant, or there was a grant opportunity, and we knew about this big pitch floating around, and we just sort of paired them together. And so this was one of these pitches that we got funding for, and I believe it was Irissa did the audio, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she was paid to do that. But this is, an example of a project that if it's sort of big enough and we can find funding, we can do that kind of thing.
So there are a few ways that a writer can see and claim a pitch. As we've mentioned, the pitch doc, through the resource hub, through a form called the Claim a Pitch. And there's also a Slack channel to claim a pitch, and a monthly email, or by reaching out to that specific writer. And Jason's going to take it over from here.
Yeah, so I'm going to basically run through the pitch process, what it looks like from the end of a contributor, like the public facing end, which is the resource hub, and then show what it looks like on the back end, which is Airtable. And I actually want to start by just making sure everyone sees the process for a new contributor get involved and what that looks like. So if you're trying to tell someone to sign up, you know what to tell them. So like I mentioned before, all contributors, typically they don't get to access the resource hub until they've been onboarded. So what does that look like? No. So the easiest place to tell people to go to sign up to be a contributor is the Southside Weekly homepage. There's this tab in the menu called Get Involved. If you go to that, it brings up a form very slowly, apparently. Contributor form. So we ask every contributor to fill this out. I'm just going to fill it out to then show you where it goes on the back end. No, I'm going to say test. So we ask for name, pronouns, email, social media handles, which is relatively new. And if we don't have those, we do want you all as primary editors to try to make sure you get those for writers and artists working on your stories. We ask them what neighborhood they're living in. Many of these are optional so that people don't have to tell us. We ask them to tell us about why they want to get involved. We ask them to select their interests: editing, writing, data, visuals, illustration, photography, etc. Topics they're interested in. This will be more useful now that we have beats, so we can pair new writers with section editors. We ask them for writing samples if they want to give it. They don't have to. Most people don't. We ask them if they've attended any previous workshops. Ask them how they heard about us. We ask if they have a pitch. So a lot of people do come in with a pitch, and so that's always good to check to see if they filled that out. And then at the bottom, these are optional gender, race questions that aren't tied. Well, they sort of are tied, but they're not viewed with their submission. They're not things that we take into consideration. They're things that we look at later that are after they're anonymized, just to sort of see who's contributing, who's signing up to be a contributor. Okay, so you submit that. Apparently I didn't do something. Okay. It says, thanks for contributing, but your interest, check your inbox for an email. So everyone should receive an automated email after they fill out this form. This is that email. It says, thank you for interest in contributing. Use this link to schedule a video chat with an editor during upcoming office hours. Right now, they're just Jackie, and hers are from 4 to 7 on Thursdays. Also gives them the writer's guide, and it gives Jackie's email for questions. Here's the Calendly link. This is to schedule time with Jackie. This is useful for anyone. Y'all can use this if you need to discuss a pitch or a story. You just go to office hours and you select the day and the time. And then you just fill out your information, and that's scheduled. So we are basically the first way that someone can get, a new contributor can get onboarded is by them scheduling a one-on-one meeting with Jackie. I think we want to ask you all if there's like an hour every week or every 2 weeks even that we could set aside for you all to have office hours to see if we can, like, if for instance, if someone's interested in housing, they could set up a one-on-one with Malik. So we can talk about that later, but I think eventually it'd be great if we had more office hours and more options for editors to talk to. And then if people don't set up one-on-one meetings, then we will set up monthly or bi-monthly group onboarding sessions with folks. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Any questions about that? Cool. Okay. So next I'm going to show the resource hub. So the resource hub has 4 main resources. It has the flow, which is our content schedule. You all will probably mainly be accessing that through the Airtable, but all of the other contributors can access it through the resource hub. The pitch doc, which we talked about, you can use that to claim a pitch, and there's also a form to submit a new pitch. And office hours, you can also sign up for office hours with Jackie and hopefully you all through the resource hub. And then there's a list of resources like the editor's guide, the writer's guide, style book. There's also previous recordings of workshops that we did over the last 2 years. And some of the ones that we're recording now will probably be added to that repository. Oh, let me go back. So now I'm going to show it to you, but I want to make sure everyone has the password. The password is weekly pitch. And also just a heads up, I'm going to be, we're going to like splice this and probably use this recording to send to new contributors so that they have a little bit of a walkthrough for the resource hub ahead of time. So, okay. So you go to the homepage, go to Contributors Hub. It'll ask you for a password. You type in weekly pitch, all lowercase, all one word. Apparently I got it wrong. Okay. So this is the flow. This is an Airtable embed. Again, you all probably won't be needing to view this, but every other contributor can access it to see what stories are scheduled for the upcoming issue, which stories were recently assigned, and then the unassigned category are things that are in limbo. Some of them are very old and probably need to be cleaned up, but mostly can be kind of ignored. The most relevant information is what's coming up for the next issue. So then we have the pitch doc. So again, this is an Airtable embed. The newest story should be listed at the top and say new. I think they say new if they're 30 or maybe 60 days. I think 30 days old or younger. So you can scroll through there. You can obviously click on it to expand it to get more information about it. And then if someone wants to claim a pitch, you go to the form below it. First step is you select your name. So this is why we've been asking people to fill out the form first, so that their name's already in the database, and everything that they do will then be tied to their record. So I'm going to search for my name. Bam, found it. Again, I'm going to enter my. So we find the story. I'm just going to pick vaccines. Notes. Thoughts about an angle you want to take, deadline, relevant reporting you've done, why you're interested in this pitch, and so on. Test, submit. Okay, says thanks for claiming a pitch. She'll be in touch within 2 weeks. We should try to be in touch quicker than that. Okay, so that's how someone claims a pitch. Then over here on the right side, you'll see you can submit a pitch. This is the form you use. Many of you have already used it. Not much to say here, pretty straightforward. You give the story a title, you give a short description. This is relatively new. We're asking people if they're connected to the event or the person that they're covering. So definitely keep an eye on this when you're looking at new pitches. And then there's also this final how to pitch, which goes over a lot of the information that we just discussed in the presentation, but you can always use this to refer back to it. Some examples of pitches here. And then I'm just going to go back to the contributors hub. The other things that you'll find here are, again, office hours for Jackie and other editors. So you can always access that through the resource hub. And then this link for the writer's guide, editor's guide, style book are also here. I guess the only other thing is the workshop series. So these are not happening because of the pandemic, but we'll hopefully be bringing them back in person eventually. And in the meantime, we'll probably just do more videos. So if you go to video recaps, there's some old videos. We didn't record all of them, but we got music journalism, data journalism, fundamentals of editing. Olivia did that one too. So people can go back and watch clips from these. But yeah. Any questions about the resource hub? Cool. Jackie, did I miss anything?
How would a section editor go about submitting a pitch?
They would submit it just like I did, or using the form. So you go to pitch doc, you go to submit a pitch, and you just use this form to submit it. What I'm about to show you is the sort of back end, which is Airtable. You can also submit it directly in Airtable. It might just be easier to use this form. It's sort of up to you all.
Cool.
So yeah, now I'm going to show Airtable and just do kind of a general overview of Airtable structure. So, and then maybe if people have run into any questions about Airtable, now could be a time to talk about them. But so the basic structure of Airtable is that there are these things called workspaces. That's what, like this common operations is a workspace. So you can have several bases within a workspace. You can also share a whole workspace with someone. You probably wouldn't want to do that. So within this workspace, we have this SSW flow, which is basically the only Airtable base that I think you all will be using. You can, just to go back, you can create a new one for yourselves if you want. I highly recommend them as a sort of project management tool. Like if you see this one, it's called Jason's dashboard. This is what I use to keep track of my tasks. And I just organize them by today, tomorrow, various categories. And when they're done, I say completed and I archive them and they remove from my list. But highly recommend as a project management tool. So feel free to add bases and make your own. So this is the Southside Weekly base, Southside Weekly Flow base. So within the base, you have these tables or tabs along the top. Each one is basically a database of unique information. There's all of the stories are in the first one, all of the pitch claims or assignments are in the second one, all of the people are in the third one, and all the places are in the fourth one. And then I would say basically don't worry about any of the other tabs for now. The main one that you're going to be interacting with is stories and probably claims assignments. Within a table, there are these different views. So you can access the views on the left side here. It says views. You can make that go away by clicking on it. So views are different ways of visualizing, sorting, and grouping information. So each one of these is it's using the same database of information, but just sorting them in a different way. So we're looking at the content schedule. This is just showing you all the stories that have been scheduled for an issue. But another way to view it would be new pitches. So this is just showing you new pitches that haven't been accepted yet. So these are the kinds of things that we'll go over typically on our Friday meeting. Thanks everyone for submitting pitches. The pitch doc is just another view, another way of sorting this information. So this is what is embedded on the resource hub. And not that you'll probably ever need to do this, but the way that you do that is you say share view up here at the top in pink. And you can either copy and paste this link and give it to someone, and they can't edit that, but they can look at it. Or you can say embed this view on your website, and that opens this up and gives you a little iframe embed code. So that's how that works. Again, not something you'll probably have to worry about. And then I also just organize these as the most used views. You probably won't have to look at any of the other ones. Archive is useful because it shows every story. So every week after we publish the content is archived, so it'll disappear. And if you ever wanted to go back and look at it, you could find it in the archive. Another thing to mention is that these views by default are public. So any change I make is going to affect everyone's view. So please don't make big adjustments to the filters or the grouping or the whatever sorting, because it'll affect everybody. But you can make a personalized view if you want. And the way that you do that is, you go down here to create a view on the left side. You can create different types of views. So the one that we're looking at is called a grid view, but you can also create forms, calendars, galleries, Kanbans. Kanbans are awesome. I don't know if you're all familiar with them, but they're just ways to visualize information as little cards, and you can sort of move them along in a process. So I'm going to delete this, but I just want to show that. So let's just create another grid view and say you want to make this personal, so you can sort it however you want it. The way that you make it personal is you go up here to this little icon at the top, click on it, and say personal view. So if you do this on your end, it'll add this little icon and it says your personal view, and no one else will be able to see that view, and any changes you make won't affect anyone else. Let me give you an example of what you could do. Maybe you want to filter it out by You only want to look at stories. I don't know why you would want to do this, but you could say like, let's look at stories that have a specific content warning. This is really all terrible. Maybe I won't do that. Maybe you want to look at every story that has a specific issue status. So you could do that. I want every story that's definitely in, and that's what's showing you. And then on top of that, you could group them. You could add a grouping. So a typical grouping is I want to see the stories that are definitely in by publication date. So then I would group them by publication date. Again, these aren't things that you'll typically probably have to do, but it's useful to understand how the sort of structure works. Are there any questions about this so far?
How can someone search with an Airtable?
Yeah, you just go to the little search icon over here. I don't know actually how. So yeah, you can search, I guess, the whole base, and that might not be super useful because if you're someone who uses it a lot, it'll pull up every mention of my name. But you could go within, for instance, people, and you could look for person, and it would show you, it would highlight everyone in that specific table.
I have a question, Jason. Would Airtable notify me if there's a writer who claimed a pitch on my section, or how would I be like?
Yeah.
How would I know?
It's a great question. So I want actually everyone to follow along and do this. So there is a way to get notified, but not specifically if a writer picks up your story. But there is a way to be notified anytime someone picks up a pitch or submits a pitch, which doesn't happen all that often. So I think it's useful for you all to turn that function on, and I'll show you how to do that. You don't have to if you don't want to receive those emails, but I think it's really helpful. So the way to do that is you go to the view that is the form. So the pitch submission form that's embedded on the Resource Hub is a view. It's right here. Oh, you all won't see it. So I will make it visible. So I'm going to change from personal to collaborative. Now you should be able to open up the stories table and see this view called pitch submission form. So if you click on it and then go to the bottom of the form, there's an option that says email me at, and then it should say your email address. And if you turn that on so that it's green, now you'll receive emails with new pitches. And you can ignore the ones that aren't relevant to you, and obviously pay attention to the ones that are. But in addition to getting those emails, we'll be discussing them. We should be discussing them every Friday. So we'll have a kind of a group discussion about what's come in and what assignments people are going to pick up.
By Friday, you mean the issue meeting, right?
Yeah, the issue meeting. Does that make sense, Anna?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. And that's the case with any form. You can go to any form and turn this on if you want to be notified about the submissions. And so the one other form that you might want to do that is over here in claims assignments. So, okay, first thing to show you, again, there's views. The most used view that you probably will only use is called new claims. This shows the claim that I made. I picked up the story. So it has my name, the story, and let me finish my thought. So I'm going to change pitch claim form to collaborative so you all can turn that on. So now you can go to this form, go to the bottom and say, email me if you want to see new assignments. Going back to new claims. So I submitted this so that you could see what it looks like on the back end. So This is a view that will filter to only show new things. And there's a similar view in the stories. It's called new pitches, has all these. I'm gonna just show what it looks like. So if we wanted to accept this claim, so this is saying Jason wants to pick up the story. If we thought that Jason is a good fit for the story, you just would update, actually, oh yeah, primary. So basically there's this one status that changes its location, right? So right now it says new, but you can change the status to denied if you wanted to say, I don't think Jason can take the story on, or accepted. Accepting it will move it to the content schedule, because we're saying like this is a story that's going to happen. So let's go ahead and do that. But I also want to point out this other column next to it called documentation. This is a thing I made recently to remind people how to, basically how to use this view. So it says to clear a record from this view, the claim status must be updated. If you'd like to approve and move the claim assignment to the content schedule, update the claim status to accepted, and then has more information. But that's what we'll do. But if you ever forget, you can reference that. So we're going to say accepted, and that should move it to recently assigned. Yes.
And it removes it from the pitch doc, right?
And it removes it from the pitch doc. Although it says writer, producer, Jackie. I wonder, maybe, did you pitch it?
Yeah, that was my pitch.
Okay, so I got to fix this. But yeah, any questions about that?
And because I pitched it, then I would most likely become the primary editor for that story, or I can send it to a section editor.
And again, these aren't things that you might not have to do, but I think it's really useful to understand the sort of structure and how these things work. So the way to like remove it, right? If I didn't want to delete it, like you should basically never delete anything in Airtable, right? You just sort of move it to different views because we want to keep a database of everything. So I want to undo what I just did. And the way to do that is to change the pitch status to new. And that should have moved it back. It didn't. Why didn't it? I'll figure that out, but not something you'll ever have to do. But it moved it away out of the content schedule. Right. So, and if I submitted a new pitch, it would show up under new pitches. And very similar to the claims, there's this field called pitch status that if I want to move something to the pitch doc, you would click on this and you would say accepted. That'll send it to the pitch doc so anyone can see it. But if someone like Jim pitched this story, if he wanted to write it himself, which does it say that? No. Right, so you would talk to Jim and say like, do you want to write the story? You say no. So you would accept it, send it to the pitch doc. But if he did, you would instead say that it's claimed. Claimed is going to move it again to the content schedule. And again, if you forget that, you can click on this documentation and it explains what you have to do to move it to the place you want to move it. Okay. That's what the back end looks like. Are there any sort of general or specific questions about this?
I just feel like I'm gonna have to rewatch this presentation.
Yeah, and I mean, it'll really become much more clear once you start playing with the Airtable. I would recommend creating a new base and trying to use it for project management or creating a new view and filtering and sorting things. But I think it's like, you know, Airtable is incredibly powerful, and I think it's gonna be very useful for everyone to kind of like figure out how to use it because it has so many applications for personal as well as professional.
I would just say, just prioritize familiarizing yourself with the content schedule. I mean, it's good to know all the other functions, but the view that you're most going to be looking at, usually is going to be the content schedule, which is basically the list of stories that are coming up in upcoming issues. So that would be the first tab, right? The tab all the way on the left that says stories. And then you want to click on the view that says content schedule. So prioritize that view and then figure out the rest.
Yeah. And I mean, you could probably get away with not having to do anything else, but it would be helpful if everyone had a sort of fundamental understanding of how the Airtable works. Okay. What else was I going to do? Right. So does that sort of make sense that the fact that the resource hub is the public facing side of things and that the Airtable is the back end? So we mentioned that instead of submitting a pitch through the public facing side, you all could go into the Airtable and submit it through the form in the Airtable. So if you wanted to submit a new pitch through the Airtable, you would find the form, pitch submission form, and you would, for some reason, I don't think you can actually enter the information in this view. You have to go to open form. And this is a shareable link that you could send to someone, but you could also just fill it out yourself. And then you could submit it. And instead of having to go to the resource hub, you could do this. But I'm not sure that it's that much faster or more helpful. Okay, no more questions? Is there anything I missed, Jackie?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered everything.
People still trying to come up with a better way to filter the people. There's a lot. There's a lot of different ways that might be useful to view them. One thing that is in progress is a way to track new contributors. So this is we have a Kanban setup that has not been used properly, and so there's all of these records that need to be updated. But I'm going to clear this out, and I think probably use a variation of this kind of tracker so that we collectively can see when a new contributor fills out the form, they'll show up on the left side and uncategorized, right? Again, there are these little cards that you can click on to expand and view information. And then the idea would be to move, you can just drag and drop them and move them along the process until they're onboarded or if they get stalled. But the idea is to have a sort of a system that we can all view and all work together to track the progress of a new contributor being onboarded. Not functional yet, will be soon, and we'll probably have a follow-up meeting to discuss it. See, this is the test email. This is the test that I submitted. So it would show up there. We'll just say he's onboarded and then it disappears. Okay. Oh, and then one thing I didn't mention if it wasn't obvious is that everything can be dragged and dropped. So like if we wanted to move this story to this issue date, you can just drag it and drop it. Okay. Back to this. Jackie, did you want to say something else about this slide?
Yeah, so yeah, let's just look at the timeline really quickly from, I mentioned earlier that the first step in the editorial process for any story is the pitch, right? So here we see like the chronology of events. At the very top, you start by writing a pitch. Someone writes a pitch, whether it's you as a section editor or a writer or somebody else. The pitch is then approved and sent to the pitch doc. Jason already kind of illustrated that. A pitch is, and then a pitch gets claimed. So the claim is accepted in the Airtable and removed from the pitch doc. And then shortly after, a primary editor is assigned. Many times the primary editor will be the person who wrote the pitch. But since now we have, more section editors, I think things are going to change a little bit, and section editors will be the primary editors for many of these stories that are getting claimed. And this assignment will usually happen at the next issue meeting, or or through Slack. By I would be messaging one of you and asking if you have the capacity to primary edit a story that has just been claimed. So that's where the primary editor would email the writer 1 to 3 days after the story has been assigned. And then by the next issue meeting after that, you want to call the writer. And this is especially encouraged for new writers, people who have a lot of questions or are a little nervous. It helps to, set up a call with them. And then you want to check in with them 1 week before the deadline that both of you set. So, it's nice to suggest a deadline, when you're first discussing the pitch with the writer. But as we've said before, many times these deadlines change, or they're pushed further down. So it's just nice to keep checking in with the writer as their deadline is approaching. The first draft of the story would be due 2 Sundays before production night. In other words, like 8 days before production night, roughly a week. And you would perform first edits by the issue meeting before production night. These are ideal dates. Obviously, we don't always meet them, but it's nice to have an ideal. And you want to send the draft 2 seconds and fact checking by that production Monday at the latest, if we want that story to be included in the print issue. And the rest is history. Do you all have any questions about this timeline? Cool, no questions. Well, I hope that means that, we all understand the process. And that's all I have for you. And then at the end, we have the direct links to the hub, to the pitch doc, etc. And there's some homework. Sorry, y'all. If you haven't already, can you please submit 1 or 2 pitches by next week, by Tuesday? I believe quite a few of you have already sent in 1 or 2, maybe more. So thank you for that. But those of you who haven't, using what you learned today, try to send us a couple of pitches by next week. And we also want to encourage you to come to office hours sometime in the next 2 weeks, just so that we can have a one-on-one and just see how you're feeling about, the job and anything that we've shared or taught you this in the past couple weeks.
And if folks aren't available Thursday from, was it 4 to 7, then just reach out to Jackie to set up a different time.
Are there any questions or comments? Do people feel like this is something that is manageable for everyone? Cool. I'm getting thumbs up.
I didn't know you could do thumbs up on learning.
Yeah, on Zoom you can.
How do you do it?
There's a reactions button toward the right side of the screen.
Okay.
Cool.
Cool. All right, so that's all I have.
Yeah, me too. Any last comments, questions that people would like to address?
We ended early.
Yay.
I think I submitted my pitch incorrectly through the Airtable. So should I just resubmit those through the form?
I don't think you did it wrong. I mean, so why do you think you did it wrong?
Oh, I guess I just like directly typed it in. Okay.
Oh, you could do that too. You could do that.
Okay.
So the only reason that's obviously like the most direct, easy way to do it. The only reason I would maybe not do it is because then it doesn't trigger an email. It doesn't really matter.
Okay.
It doesn't matter for you all because we'll all kind of see it on the back end. But yeah, it just doesn't trigger the same steps if you don't submit it through the form. But
okay, that makes sense.
yeah, you could totally do it that way. I didn't even think about doing it that way, but that makes sense. Yeah. So what Maddie did was you just clicked on the plus and just start typing it in. You can totally do that.
Yeah, it's probably the most direct way. But I mean, that just means we don't get notified, but it's fine either way because we're going to be looking at this view during our issue meetings. So it's fine.
Now, was that how you entered them as well? Alan?
That's how I did. Yeah, I did mine's that way too.
Yeah, that's totally fine. That's why I was surprised when I opened this because I didn't get any alerts about new pitches, but they were all here. But that's a totally fine way to do it.
Cool. Any other comments or questions?
I do have a question. You might have said this, but I just wanted to get some clarity on it. You mentioned, so let's just say I wanted to, pitch a story and write it as well, right? So would I still work as the primary editor of my own piece? How would that work? So
yeah, question. Yeah. No, if you pitch the story and you also claim the story, then we would assign another primary editor. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I just was clear.
Oh, I just want to show one other thing. So that the story that I claimed, it's now back here on the pitches for review because I put it in new. So if I wanted to move it back to the pitch doc, I would say accepted. And then I want to show one other thing on the pitch doc. If I go look at that, there's this column in the pitch doc that says push to Slack. All you do is click that, and that automatically sends the pitch to that Slack channel called Claim a Pitch. So I think that's kind of new and we haven't used it a ton, but that, I think the way to think about that is like the quickest way to get your pitch to be seen is to do that. And because it might take a week or 2 or 3 to get it in an email. Although I think now that we're going to have more pitches, we should think about a faster way to get them out there. I don't know if it's emails or what, but I would definitely just encourage new writers to keep an eye on that Slack channel. And let me just pull it up. Oh, I can't. Anyway, so that if you check Slack now, the Claim a Pitch channel, that this pitch will now show up there.
Cool. Cool. I have nothing else to add. But if you all have any questions, now's the time to do it.
No, I don't have any questions, but I definitely will need the recording of this because it was like a lot, but it's all very like, it makes sense. Yeah,
and it was just, today was meant to be kind of your first introduction to the structure. And I mean, I'm going to be real with you. I don't know that there's anyone at the Southside Weekly except me that actually understands Airtable or likes it maybe, but so don't feel bad if you feel confused by it because most people do, but I think once you start to use it, it'll get more comfortable. You'll get more comfortable with it.
Also, I'm curious, do people understand how Southside Weekly's pitch process looks different than, your traditional pitch practices?
Yes. Yeah, so I don't know if others.
I think you're muted, Alma.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I don't usually, I've done it, I pitched before and usually it's via email. And I've usually the stories that I did pitch to Southside Weekly before were via email. But then I discovered that there was ways that I can actually, claim pitches. So that was for me very cool because I could see everything that the editors were, like interested in. So I could do either like pitch my own stories or look at like what you guys already have in mind and then select. So that makes it, I think, easier, for me. So that was, yeah, that was cool. I don't know if there's a process out there like that, but yeah, it's cool.
Thank you. And I'm glad you bring that up because a lot of people do reach out to us by email and, they might not be aware of the different forms and the pitch stock and things like that. So sometimes we get emails to our editor email. The only reason why that doesn't work sometimes is because it's easy for those emails to get lost just because we get so many like press releases and PR stuff, and these type of emails can sometimes get lost. But it's it's a valid way to pitch us a story, and especially after you've developed a relationship with a writer, they might want to forgo the pitch form, and they might just go to you directly to ask you whether they can pursue a certain story, and that's fine too. But I do think that filling out the pitch form can save us some time and can also keep us organized on our end.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I just think it's since we have such a distributed team, having everything in one place where we can all see it is really, really helpful. But yeah, like Jackie said, people are gonna pitch you via email, totally fine. It just means that you have to do a little bit more work to add it to the Airtable. And try not to lose it in your emails. And also, I like that you mentioned that it felt. I think part of the reason we do it the way we do it is that we want to lower the bar for entry. And if I think it's pretty sometimes cumbersome or scary for people that haven't pitched a story before to do that for the first time. And so we like the idea of like having a lot of pitches ready to go, and even if they don't want to claim one, they can see how they're structured. They can see things we're interested, like you said, and sort of use that to build their own pitch.
Yeah, at first I pitched a couple of stories, but then when I discovered that there was some ideas already that I could claim, I was like, yeah, this is cool. I can still pitch my own, but it's nice to see that. And I think this is useful for beginning writers too. Like you said, they might feel a little bit intimidated in putting together a pitch, but if they see something, they might be more encouraged to participate.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you see it that way because I do think that's kind of like the intention with the pitch doc, just making things more accessible to writers. And if they haven't been, trained on how to pitch, and which is something that I covered in the first slide of the presentation, right? How just the pitching process can perpetuate inequity, right? I think this is one way to make stories accessible to everyone, even those who may not have like the formal training or the practice of doing it. It just kind of, we kind of help set it up for them.
One other thing I wanted to mention before we jump off is just that one sort of area that we have been not doing a good job of keeping up with, that was a really awkward sentence, is like onboarding new contributors. partly because I feel like we've been super busy. We haven't had enough people power, that we've been sort of letting, like, sometimes folks don't get don't get notified, or we don't follow up with them for a while, which is not great. And so I think bringing you all on is going to help with that a lot. And we definitely need to nail down a system where people are, either they schedule a one-on-one, or that we have monthly like group onboardings. And right now there's a pretty significant backlog of folks that I don't think have been communicated with, that have like signed up and expressed interest. And we definitely want to go back and reach out to those people and let them know about Malik noticed that. So yeah, it's not great, but we've been sort of overwhelmed, and you sort of need that for the system to work, right? Like, I think this last year we had a lot of stories that came about because of the pandemic or because of the uprisings, but typically you need a really consistent sort of flow of new contributors, new story ideas, and so that system needs to be working sort of better than it is, and we will be working on that with y'all. Okay, call it.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
on Thursday.
Yep.
On Thursday, yeah.